Welcome, believers. Welcome, conspiracy theorists. Welcome to the wonderfully weird world of the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club, where we talk about all the batshit crazy stuff that goes on in the world. And there is loads. But before we get started, I would like to say a massive thank you to Zeta Smith with, for no reason apart from being nice, maybe this fantastic artwork. Right, there it is. Please check him out on Instagram, right? It's fantastic. So, last week we talked about the Alaska Triangle, planes and people disappearing, military planes being buzzed by UFOs. So, this week I would like to chat about the Alaska town of Portlock and the Bigfoot attacks. Attacks so bad that they caused the village to be abandoned. Right now, obviously, I always waffle on about UFOs. I'm terrible for it. I love it. I love the subject. But I also do like a Bigfoot story. So, Alaska, the largest state in the United States, is vast and empty. But with the isolation and the vast areas free from human habitation comes its fair share of spooky stories and unexplained happenings. And that's what I like, right? One of them is from Portlock Village in Port Chatham. Okay, 120 miles south of the state's most populous city, Anchorage, right? Nobody lives in Portlock now. In the 1940s, the village was abandoned after the occupants were attacked and in some cases brutally killed by something which came from the woods, right? The stories of what attacked the small salmon cannon settlement mostly revolve around a large hairy beast that haunted the dark spaces beyond the tree lines at the edge of the village. Now, whatever it was extremely aggressive and deadly to anyone caught out on their own. What was the creature? I mean, this is still to be proven. However, the locals had named it the Portlock Sasquatch. Now, as we know, Sasquatch, more commonly referred to as Bigfoot in the United States, is perhaps the most famous cryptid in history. Stories of the giant bipedal man-ape wandering the vast forest have circulated for years. However, these stories generally paint a very different picture to what happened in Portlock. Bigfoot is almost always reclusive and shy and tends to avoid humans and human contact at all cost. Now, although the sheer size of the beast draws stories of aggression and danger, it is mostly known for the traces it leaves behind. I mean, like hair snagged on foliage, and of course, its big footprints. Now, which is not to say that North America does not have dangerous animals. They exist without doubt. Bears, wolves, big cats roam the continent, and the people who settled at Portlock to make life for themselves would have been tough indeed, and dangerous animals would have always been an issue, so they would have recognised the danger when they saw it. So look, the village, established by Royal British Navy Captain Nathaniel Portlock in 1787, was in an unexplored and wild part of the country. It was a true frontier of America, and only the hardest would survive. So danger was always round the corner. But like I say, they recognised the danger. Right, interesting. There once was a small native village in the spot where Portlock would eventually be founded. And for whatever reason, it was abandoned. Now, was it abandoned because of the Bigfoot? Now, this is a haunting premonition of what was to become of Portlock in the 1900s. Okay, so Portlock had a number of industries, including hunting, fishing, logging and mining, some of which dated to the 1700s, but the largest employer, though, was the Portlock Cannery, where fresh salmon was processed and canned. Now, at first, the settlement thrived. Salmon was plentiful in the bay and a cannery operation was established, and that attracted seasonal workers and brought in good money. Now, for about a decade in the 1910s, Portlock's economy and industry ran smoothly. However, starting around the 1920s, mysterious deaths supposedly began occurring around the town. And many were convinced that these deaths weren't simply logging or hunting accidents. The townspeople believed that something was out there, something very big, something hairy and something mean, right? In addition, various groups of gold miners and hunters used to head to the mountains for their work, and some of them never came back. But accidents were not uncommon, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Additionally, A Port Graham elder, and his name was Vasnikov, also explained about a time when the Nantanaga, the Nantanag, they used to call it, what was Bigfoot, was blamed for someone's disappearance in the area. This one guy over there had a little place where he went gold digging. He went up there and never came back, and Bigfoot was blamed for that. So in 1931, though, a local woodchopper alone in the forest was found murdered. And this really when it starts. In 1931, a local woodchopper alone in the forest was found murdered. The man had been killed by a single ferocious blow, far more devastating than could have been inflicted by a single human being. Also, a man named Albert Petka supposedly was able to scare off a hairy creature with the help of his hunting dog. However, the creature had gotten in a fatal blow to Petka's chest, and though he survived to make it to town and recount his tale of survival, he died soon after. And that incident was scary enough to traumatise the entire village. So, what was out there and what was killing these men? Okay, also in 1931, a resident named Andrew Camlock was found deceased after suffering a heavy blow to the head. Now, the blow is thought to have killed him instantly and was carried out by something much larger and stronger than a human. When Camlock's body was found, he was 10 feet away from the logging equipment, and there were splats of blood on the logging equipment as well. There didn't seem to be any way that Camlock could have slipped and fallen, or simply hit his head unintentionally on the equipment. So what killed Camlock? And he wasn't the only one to die in weird circumstances. At the same time, some cannery workers went for a walk in the forest near Portlock and they never returned. And when they were found, at least one of the bodies were horribly mutilated. And it seemed unlikely that your typical forest predator could have carried out such a vicious attack. Now, the murdered men was not the first sign of an unknown threat in the woods surrounding the village. A group of hunters out stalking moose came across the giant footprints of some big animal. Now, the area around the footprints were torn up with tree branches, destroyed, and blood was found at the scene. But the trail of the moose ended abruptly there, and there was no sign of moose or the owner of that massive footprint. Now, the size of the footprint was more than 18 inches long. So whatever attacked the moose, it was the only set of tracks leading from the site of the attack. And they obviously belonged to something huge. Now soon, other such footprints were reported around the village. And worse, a resident of the village happened to see a huge and hairy man destroying the fishing wheel used to process salmon. And he described it as looking like the devil. The fish wheel were near the beach, away from the witness's shack, so the resident rushed to get his gun, and when he returned, he saw the beast staring at him. Then the beast suddenly walked away without harming the resident. And you can appreciate that. If you're pointing a gun and you miss, that thing's coming for you. If you let it walk away and neither gets hurt, that's what you would do, wasn't it, right? Now, the sightings became common and uneasiness began to prevail in the village. There were not people who were easily scared by wildlife as well, and furthermore, they would be well aware of the local predators in the area. This could not be some bear, or else they would have identified it as such. This was obviously something else. It was no bear. Now, a bear could have done the damage, but the inhabitants of Portlock wouldn't know what a bear looked like. And to top it all, bodies started appearing around the village. Many were washed into the bay from the rivers that fed it, suggesting that people, trappers and miners had been surprised and killed in the hills and forests above Portlock. So as the local population started recovering bodies, speculation regarding the deadly beast started to rise. As it would, fear took root in the population at the loss of so many lives, and people started to leave the village. So many started to leave that the cannery plant posted armed guards to attempt to keep cannery open, but it was no use. People still kept going. But in order to get a better understanding for the rumours swirling around this Alaskan ghost town, it's best to look at what available information is out there. And I can attain additionally, all through Portlock's history, people living in the area reported hearing eerie howls and seeing large creatures in the shadows at night. The incidents that occurred in Portlock appear to be a culmination of years of reports from natives living in the area that something was out there, something unusual. Now, in an old 1935 Alaska Sportsman's magazine, a peculiar letter to the editor from 1905 was discussed, and it said a group of Aleut fishermen claimed that a large, hairy man was bothering them and frightening them to the point that they left the area. Now, this is perhaps one of the first written of account of a creature being in the Portlock area. Now, the last resident fled in 1950 and the village laid abandoned. Whatever lived in the woods above Portlock and whatever had killed all those people, it had won. It wasn't a bear, right? Was it a Sasquatch? Now, it's funny, right? Now look, Teddy Roosevelt, the 26th President of the United States, wrote stories of his childhood that included an encounter with a bloke named Booman, a seasoned trapper in Idaho. Now, Booman told of an encounter with a huge, hairy creature which attacked him. He barely escaped with his life, and he was convinced that it was a Bigfoot. But such stories, although consistent with the account from Portlock, only allow speculation as to what happened in the Alaska settlement. All right, they fit the facts, but require the existence of a sustainable population of huge apes sharing a landmass with hundreds of millions of people without a single piece of concrete evidence as to their existence. Now, I understand for some this is a step too far, but there is a rumour that these Bigfoot are interdimensional creatures. And I genuinely hope that nobody finds one. I really don't, all right? Look, but the events of Portlock are not so easily explained, are they? Something was killing the inhabitants and leaving their dismembered corpses to be found by villagers. This doesn't really match the behaviour of many known wild animals. Bears are certainly large enough and strong enough to do the damage seen by the villagers and would be attracted by the salmon cannon clan. But the footprints and eyewitnesses account dispute this. The people of Portlock knew exactly what a bear looks like, and a bear is not what they were describing. So, what can be said for sure about the attacks, right? The creature from the scant eyewitnesses' account was large and covered with hair. It left large tracks which matched human feet of great size. It was strong enough to kill and dismember a grown man, and it lived in the remote wilderness of the North American continent. Sounds like a Bigfoot to me. So, what do you think? What do you think? Portlock, the town that was abandoned, mainly because of, should we say it, mysterious deaths and violence. Now, there is a rumour that once they opened up an interway or something, or a motorway, it might not have been needed and the people left simply because of that. But there was a village there before that was also abandoned, and you can't dismiss the accounts and the dead people, can you? So what do you think? I mean, what I would do is look into it and, see for yourself, make a few inquiries, look on the internet, and if you find something that I've missed, please drop me a line and let me know. Well, this was the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club. I do believe in Bigfoot. I generally do. I mean, 20 years ago I might not have done, but there is so much footage out there now, isn't there? Hikers, trackers, ramblers taking their smartphones with them and catching weird stuff. You can't deny it anymore. Bigfoot, mate, is out there. So, look, as I say, this was the Tinfoil Hat Fan Club. Please like, subscribe and ding that notification bell, and I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks very much.